Should you become a consultant right now? This is a question I get a lot from people who are just considering starting their own consulting company, whether it be an agency or just an independent consultant. And as someone that has now been consulting for 7 years, first, for those of you who don't know, off and on, as I work full-time at companies like Facebook, and now full-time as a data infrastructure and strategy consultant, I think I have a pretty good perspective on answering this question. And this question of, should I become a consultant right now, is actually inspired by an article I just read from Richard Millington, which is This Isn't a Good Time to Become a Consultant, in which he kind of shows a graph of like best times to become a consultant and worst times to become a consultant. Specifically, just to give you some TLDR, but you should go read the article, which I've linked below, that he covers the fact that if you look at his summary, that too many people become consultants after some form of redundancy, right? There's been a lot of tech layoffs. So honestly, there are a lot of people who want and consider becoming a consultant. During difficult times is also not a great period in general, because if you're just starting your journey, and we're going to talk about that because I do have some nuance that I want to add into this perspective in terms of what I think about should you become a consultant, because I think I do have a few, maybe not disagreements, but some clarifications that I think I'd like to add. But basically the notion being that there are good times and bad times to become consultants. And right now, if you do feel like there's a recession or, there have been a lot of layoffs, which, if you look at the numbers, does seem to be pushing that direction, it might not be a good time to start your journey as a consultant. And that's what I want to clarify in this video, because it really is about, I think, starting your journey and what that means. And the fact that I believe that you can honestly become a consultant in any economy. It just depends on how, and if you're kind of doing it on the side or doing it full time. So let's talk about when is the best time for you to become a consultant, and is that right now? So the first point that I'd like to make is that it's always a bad time to become a consultant if you don't have any prospects in your pipeline. It's never a good time to quit your full-time job if you have zero, and I mean zero or very few forms of prospects that are coming, knocking on your door and saying, we want to work with you. It could be a good economic time. It could be a bad economic time. You quitting your job full time does put yourself at a lot of risk. Obviously, if you have a decent emergency fund, you can do it. It can be great to, fully focus on consulting. I'm not going to say that's not a strategy, but for many people in the US who likely can't cover $1,000 expense if they were to run into it, quitting your full-time job to hopefully make it as a consultant is a high risk. And so for me, in most periods, if you do not have some method of landing clients, and we've talked about this in other videos, but this is generally some form of marketing, content marketing, maybe you're really good with ads, having a strong network, being really good at sales and cold DMs, or really just a handful of other techniques of landing clients, it's not a good time for you to become a consultant if you don't have one of those things. Because at the end of the day, you need some method to get in front of clients that want to pay you, that will trust you, and that's not easy to do. So if you're starting from scratch, you don't have a good network, you don't have some form of accolades, becoming a full-time consultant is a bad idea. But it's always, I think, not a bad idea to occasionally test out trying to be a part-time consultant. Whether that means you just work with someone that is your friend, or maybe you go on Upwork and just get a little work here and there just to test out the idea of, hey, do I like doing this kind of side work? What's the type of work that I get? You can start to answer the difference between, contracting versus consulting. And you can become familiar with working, with external kind of partners that you don't have as much control over compared to when you work full time. Obviously, you don't have control over your boss, but there is this layer that kind of exists when you're just an external vendor versus some form of internal employee. So again, my first point is it's always a bad time to become a consultant if you don't have some method of getting in front of people, and more importantly, having them trust you and want to pay you to do a job. So again, economic times could be good, economic times could be bad. It doesn't matter. In those scenarios, you need to have a method to fix that problem. Now, that's not to say that there aren't peak times to become a consultant. Obviously, when economic times are good, that is a great time to become a consultant. Probably the years when I first started consulting full-time were probably the peak few years, right? I probably came in a little bit at the tail end, somewhere towards the end of 2021. But while interest rates were low, a lot of people were looking to take bigger risks on projects, and that can mean things like hiring consultants to give perspective. But even when economic times are bad, if you are a good consultant, that is still an opportunity to provide your services. In fact, many people might be going through experiences where they're trying to cut costs or figure out how do we, maybe do more with less, and you can be the consultant that provides those services in that moment. So even bad times can provide new opportunities that you could see, every problem, whether it's shrinking budgets, or maybe some new technology provides some opportunity for you to offer your consulting services. You provide some level of certainty. But here's a few other indicators that it might be a good time to become a consultant, depending on who you are. One, new legislation has just passed to fund a specific maybe industry that you're really knowledgeable on. For example, if you're very knowledgeable in somewhere in the skill set that is in the IRA or the Inflation Reduction Act, if you have some skill set in some part of that bill and you live in a state or you know how to get into certain projects where that funding is going, that's honestly what some consultants do. I know a lot of consultants that just pay attention to what industries are getting funding, and then that's kind of where they target. Actually, last year I had a project go the opposite way where because a bill didn't pass that had some funding connected to it, a client I was working with had to cut projects because they no longer had a certain amount of funding. And that kind of reinforces my first point that yes, obviously, if it's better economic times, there's going to likely be more projects. If there's more funding in a specific domain or industry, there will be more projects, which means you likely might get it. But the truth is, regardless of how big the pie is, if you're not good at getting in front of those people and being the solution and helping them understand that they can trust you and that you can solve their problems, it won't really matter how big the pie is because no one is going to share a piece with you. So regardless of how good economic times are, yes, the pie will grow, but if you are not there to capture it in some way, it won't matter. So even those things are temporary, and that's why you need to build methods to get clients, whether economic times are good or bad. The truth is, there is always work. There's always work to be done. Again, whether it's trying to figure out how to cut costs or implement a new AI system, there is so much work that goes around that gets passed around with a lot of the big organizations. And if you are considering becoming a consultant and you kind of feel stuck in the process of landing clients or trying to just find other consultants you can work with on some of these projects that are bigger so you can actually compete with some of the bigger companies that are out there like your Deloitte and Accentures and Analytics 8, then I'd recommend you join the Technical Freelancer Academy, which is free for you to join. It has a giant free section with tons of content, hours of content. I think we're at 6 or 7 hours of free content. I'm adding more every month, and we're at almost 800 members. We're growing really quickly. And so if you have questions about consulting or how to, land clients or anything of that nature, feel free to join the TFA. Again, it's a free group that I started that has tons of great consultants who are talking all about some of these problems. So hopefully this helped answer the question, should you become a consultant today? And if you have any further ones, feel free to comment below, but also feel free to put those comments in posts at the TFA. With that, guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Thanks all. Bye.